Building the inventive muscle to compete. In this episode, I'll take you on a fast, connected journey across 6 basic ideas that together will show you why invention isn't accidental or rare, but really a human capability that's shaped by experience, process, culture, resistance, but now AI, and why building the inventive muscle in your organization and also personally is becoming what I would say is a defining advantage in our future. This is John Cronin from Invent Anything.
Inventions keep the world spinning. From fire in the wheel to today's high tech, inventions power change. Turn your inventions into reality. Learn how to get your ideas to market. This is Invent Anything with John Cronin.
Today we'll cover 6 different topics. In order to have you kind of believe the topic is being presented by someone who has a background here, I want to talk a little bit about my journey that got me here, and then move from that to talking about the value of creative thinking as a process in business and in personal exploration. In topic number 3, I want to talk about tools, process, and motivation for building the inventive muscle. And then in topic 4 and 5, I'm going to work on 2 different sides of this. Topic 4, we're going to talk about why the inventive muscle works, and I'll do it at a high level down to a practical level. And in topic number 5, I'm going to talk about why you can't build inventive muscle. What stops you? And again, I'll do that from a high level to more of a practical level. And then I'll, in topic number 6, talk about what actually drove me to put this podcast together. And that's sort of thinking about the future of the inventive muscle, which I'm going to sort of make a concept here that it's a digital inventive muscle. We've heard the phrase digital twin. I'm starting to see a digital inventive muscle, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll wrap up. Every time I do these podcasts, after I'm finished with the content, I go back and think about who the audience would be that might benefit from this. But certainly one audience which I've talked to over the years is those that are familiar with creativity and practice. These are people that might do brainstorming. They might have a personal interest in creativity. This really is for you because it takes all of that last 30, 40 years of kind of creativity and practice and puts it into a new world here. CEOs, I think that's a big part of the audience that I talk to. I must talk to 20, 30 CEOs a week um, in my business of IP Capital. And so CEOs, I think, are really the ones that need to understand how everything has changed and why the inventive muscle might be something that could really help them with their business. Investors always are looking for those unicorns, high growth potential. And I think as they scour around looking for deals, if they could find deals where the company's really focused on building their inventive muscle, then it'll probably pay off better. Now, these companies won't say they're building their inventive muscles. There's all sorts of things they might say about why they're different and, why they're doing things that nobody else has done. But these are phrases that are really, you know, sort of code for we're inventive. And if you're inventive and you're doing it over and over again, then you're using your inventive muscle. This is also not as a dry thing, but for management that wants to understand or supervisory levels that want to understand sort of a briefer on how to get this started, this is definitely for you. But also as an audience, I think for those who want to understand the connection between AI and creativity, which is a huge, big topic today, I'm going to touch on a lot of the things there that I think would be very helpful. And then finally, for an audience of those who want to maybe start their journey on the inventive muscle, and you might not know this, but I think that you'd expect to see something between 10x and 100x better results. And that is in business, and that's whatever the metric's going to be. More revenue, more growth, larger brand in the market, etc. So in Invent Anything here coming up, the first 2 topics, I'm going to connect 2 threads. My journey that takes us from my background in IBM in the 80s, mentorship, how I discovered creative thinking in my own mind, my journey through IP Capital with the invention methodology. And then, of course, I'll touch on a number of times, but I'm a practicing inventor with 2,500 patents or so. So basically, that should tell you that I'm a practitioner of this inventive muscle. But then I want to move to topic two, which is the sort of value of creative thinking as a process, and unpack this as a disciplined, learnable set of tools based on associative thinking, but also on continuous improvement thinking, and understand that almost every single breakthrough that we see is driven by this creative thinking process, and how this invention process can just start quietly in an organization and spread very powerfully and deliberately if we get amplified by using these processes. Okay, topic number one, my journey. Um, uh, I'm very proud of the work I've done, but even more proud of the people I've met and the mentors who've taught me, and a lot of my business associates that's part of the journey with me. But I started off at IBM in the 1980s and was mentored by a number of folks. A person named Bruce Bertelson, who was an inventor, and Carter Cantor, who's a very good friend of mine. And these guys basically recognized that I could invent and do it really well. And so in the very beginning of my career at IBM, ended up having about 100 patents and became the top inventor of the company. And then later I was asked by IBM's management if I could create a group, which I did, called the IBM Patent Factory. And its mission was to help really stretch the inventive muscle. And we went from about 1,000 patents to 3,500 patents a year. But more importantly, from a business perspective, we went from about 20 million a year in licensing to almost 2 billion a year in licensing. And I really will go back to, in my journey, the value of mentorship was tremendous. I remembered one day, as I was a practicing inventor, um, I tasked myself with trying to ask myself, how am I inventing? How am I doing it actually? And so the more I asked myself that question, I really couldn't figure it out. I was hiring people to tell me about creative thinking and creative problem solving, and I started reading about creativity and so on. And I really didn't figure it out until one day I was vacuuming, which is a rare occurrence for me. And as I started to see, when you vacuum, you can see the tractor treads, lines where the wheels are and so on. All of a sudden, an idea popped into my head. And I was like, what is going on? Where did this idea come from? So I shut off the vacuum cleaner and sat on the steps of my house. And I started to ask myself this question: how did I do that? What was I thinking when this idea came? What was I thinking right before it, and right before that, and right before that? And then it hit me that my mind was somehow using the treads in the rug and relating it to a problem that I was working on in masks and semiconductors. And I got to see a sort of formation of an idea that my mind started grasping and started improving. And for that moment, an aha moment, I was literally fascinated that my mind was doing that. And I did not teach it to do that. I did not train it to do that. And what a beautiful moment that was. That moment changed my life because I saw creative thinking in my head. I saw what I was doing. And the beautiful thing is that for everybody listening to this podcast, the same will be true for you. And we'll talk about those tools and techniques. I left IBM with the idea that maybe I could build my own business, which turned out to be true. And I started IP Capital, now 30 years in business. And we have used sort of invention on demand, a set of creative thinking tools with technical people to create lots of patents, thousands and thousands and thousands of patents. And we really are in the business of inventive muscle training. And we have proved it countless times on a daily basis. Now, I throw the word creativity tool around, and I have found that it's abstract if you don't know what a creativity tool is. So I'll give you an example, and we'll just store that away. But the first 4 or 5 podcasts in the Invent Anything series is all about creative thinking. So, if you want to get more insight, go to that. But there's a creativity tool we use quite a bit called noun verb. And that is that when we're working with somebody, we pull out their ideas and naturally brainstorm with them, but then we'll say, well, why don't we use a creativity tool? And we'll use the tool noun verb. And simple, right? And so supposing my company is making better shovels and they're giving me ideas for better metals on the tips of the shovel, better lighter stocks, better handles, more ergonomic. And we get all those ideas. And then finally we say to them, okay, now we've got all your ideas out. Why don't we use a creativity tool called noun verb? And so what we do is say the noun would be shovel because that's what you're working on. But the verb, and these are words that sort of end in ing, right? We're going to use a random verb with the noun. So we just look at the dictionary. There's obviously websites that you can do this with. And let's pick out three verbs like mixing shovel or vibrating shovel or flashing shovel. The verbs have nothing to do with shovel. It's just random. So I looked to the crowd of folks, the engineers, and I said, what does flashing shovel mean to you? It's a provocation, right? And so all of a sudden someone might say, my goodness, we're developing these rubber handles because workers need to be safe when they're digging around, high power lines that are in the ground. And if there was some way to get the shovel to kind of light up when we're near a high power line, that would be cool. It'd be a flashing shovel. And someone says, my son's an electrical engineer and he's been playing around with circuits. And I bet you if we asked him, I bet you there's a circuit that you could put on the shovel to pick up the energy, it's emitted by these power lines. Another guy says, that's cool. I mean, we could put the battery in the stock and we could put the light in the handle. And one guy says, yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, everything has an app today. Maybe you put a little radio in the handle and have it go to an app and just let the management know that there's dangerous power in the ground. And pretty soon it explodes and you get lots of ideas. Random verb and a noun. And we haven't even gotten to mixing shovel or vibrating shovel and the other 2,000 verbs that are in the dictionary. That's a creativity tool as an example. We've categorized 1,500 of those and have used about 20 or 30 over and over again. I've worked with about 2,000 companies in all technology areas with all types of people from CEOs and executives, fellows, I mean, you name it. These tools work pretty much on everybody. When you want to build the inventive muscle, it's really no different than any other muscle you might want to build. It takes practice. You might have to get in a special diet, exercise a certain way, do it at a certain pace. Same is true with the inventive muscle. There's a metaphor there to be followed. When you start thinking about another part of the journey, my journey anyway, was I started recognizing that the motivation for doing invention in my life comes from impossible problems or, watching kind of inventors at work. Chester Carlson was a guy who literally built xerography in his kitchen because he wanted a better way to basically create copies. There's a great book called Inventors at Work that you could take a look at, which is a story about the journey of many different inventors. Of course, thinking with, right? That artists are creative. But everybody has an associative thinking brain, so everybody has the capability of being creative. And everybody is creative on a routine level. We may not recognize it, but creativity is a very important thing that we're doing. And again, if you want more background on this, my first 4 podcasts cover creativity pretty well. The definition of creativity is new and useful. That's new to you and useful to somebody else. And I always say new and useful to everybody except your mother because she would always love what you're doing. So if it's new to you and you find a use for that idea, then it's creative to you. Ruth Noel, who studied creativity, said that it was a function of knowledge, imagination, and evaluation. So now we say that you have to have knowledge to be creative, and you have to have imagination, which is the new and useful, but then you have to evaluate it, meaning that there's some criteria that it's a good enough idea. You might not recognize that creativity is something that's not taught in colleges. It's not something that's taught in business schools. I think there's only 2 places in the world you can get a PhD in creativity as a social science. In business, creativity finds its way in organizations. There's a guy named Michael Curtin who developed what was called the Curtin Adapter Innovator Scale. And he talks about how organizations will be creative, sort of, incremental folks and adaptive folks, and then innovators. So we find creativity moved up into the realm of organizational behavior. But I will tell you that creative thinking is the basis of a neural network. Your brain is a neural network, and associative thinking is what it does, and it creates a lot of things. So, having investigated this, all sorts of thinking has come from creative thinking. Logical thinking has been derived from creative thinking. So, all sorts of different thinking frameworks have been derived, and many of them, their foundation sprung from creative thinking. One of the things about creative thinking is it gets results and it is infectious. De Bono, who's written 40 or 50 books in the subject of creative thinking, he basically said that let's not talk about creativity because that's a value judgment. If I say I'm creative, you might have an offense by that. If I said you're creative, you might think, thanks, John. If I said to somebody the most creative person in the room, you'd say, geez, uh, thank you very much for recognizing me, but everybody else is going, what about me? So De Bono said, don't think about creativity, think about lateral thinking. And given a different sort of concept that it's just different. It's moved off of the front and center. One of the things about studying creative thinking and creative problem solving is this concept that it's not uh, if you're creative, it's not how much you're creative, it's how you use creative thinking. It's not how creative you are, it's how you are creative. You can be a very creative accountant, you can be a very creative doctor, or you can be a very creative scientist. And since all breakthroughs seem to have foundationally this idea of creative thinking, we should recognize it. Even Einstein with equals MC squared, his story was he was lying back on a knoll with grass, just sort of relaxing, following this sort of light beam that shone in his eye. We've always had that, every once in a while you have this optical kind of illusion where you see kind of a beam of light, by looking, into light in a different way. He just imagined himself taking a ride on a photon. And from that imagined journey, he constructed E equals mc squared as one of the foundational changes in physics. One of the things about creativity is if it's obvious or not. In the area of patentability, creativity, a patent is something that's new and useful, but it's also non-obvious, meaning that you can show that nobody else had that idea before. So the patent office is a sound judge of what is creative. And so that's why patents come into play. And patents are kind of good from a business perspective because they help you with your business, brand, stop copycats, they help with M&A. But for sure, businesses can use creative thinking, uh, but also for sure you can use creative thinking in your life personally. Uh, you would say, of course, I want my kids to be creative. Why, after K through 12, do we stop that thinking? Of course, we want our engineers to be creative. It's not something that most people running engineering teams would say. They want results. They don't want to messing around with creative thinking. And there's creative thinking intrinsically and extrinsically. It can be rewarded extrinsically, or it could just be something that you get a lot of pleasure out of. Look, I could talk a long time about creative thinking and its use, but I want to sort of move on into the next couple topic areas. So coming up, we'll talk about tools, processes, and motivation. Cornerstone of that is associative thinking, how you can get disciplined. I want to talk about how you focus time on it and have a real commitment to get real good business results. And then I want to turn the page over to why the inventive muscle actually can work in an organization, why it could work for you, and talk about sort of human beings and how they're using the neural networks and how they can come up with breakthroughs or they can come up with incremental results. And so we want to talk about how, even at a practical level, the inventive muscle can work for you. So topic number three, tools, process, and motivation. Um, Again, I would have you go to my first 4 or 5 podcasts on creativity, or pick up any book on creative thinking, creative problem solving. I've spent 4 decades now studying creative thinking, and I'm always learning something new. But I can tell you that one of the fundamentals of creative thinking is called associative thinking, meaning you take at least two ideas, concepts, and put them together, and they've never been put together before. If I take a book on my desk and I take a cough drop, what do they got to do with each other? I could say, well, I could write a book on cough drops, or I could, while I'm coughing, I might want to pick up a book to calm me down, sure, but how could you make cough drops better? Well, why don't we take the wrapper and put something on the wrapper that you can read about how to make yourself healthier? So while you're chewing on your cough drop, you could consider maybe doing something more long term about your cough drop. And I could spend an hour talking about cough drops and and books. Okay, because associative thinking allows me to do that. It's a fluency skill. I did develop in IP Capital a second type of thinking that I needed to develop for inventors, and that's called continuous improvement thinking. And that is to say that to make any idea work, you have to iterate on it. So if I take my cough drop with my book and I say I want to have the wrapper be something that I'm going to put information on, so using a cough drop, you can sort of think about how to be healthier. Then the question is, how would I do that? I got wax paper, and how would I actually print on each different cough drop, maybe a different health phrase, etc., which leads me to think about, how I might stamp out in an organized way millions of different wrappers with different information. And you can see that the more I'm thinking about it, the more detailed I'm going to get. And I could go back into the database to figure out how to filter sort of phrases, or I could think about how to make my printer faster, how to put wax on the printing system, how to wrap it around. Boy, I'd love my cough drop to maybe maybe as I unwrap it, there's more information, etc. So you can see that I could just keep thinking about it and improving it. That's called continuous improvement thinking. One of the things is that I found that if you're going to work on a business problem, it's very important to work on impossible problems. And when you might say, if it's impossible, how are you going to solve it? Which is one of the things I said when I was a younger engineer. But you can get further along on an impossible problem and create great change than spend the same amount of time on an everyday problem. And you can make change there as well. So I would say pick very difficult problems as a tool. One of the key process tricks is to, use kind of a short time frame to actually be very definitive about being creative and exercising inventive muscle. I became top inventor of IBM, but one of the silliest things was that in order to get there every Friday for an hour and a half, I gave myself some personal time to invent. And I became known as a person that every Friday from 3:30 to 5, John was in his office closing the door, using his whiteboard, and pretty soon I started attracting a crowd. And so pretty soon people would, schedule time to sit with me for an hour and a half on Friday. And it was just brainstorming time in my office every single day for about a decade, every single week. That was giving myself time to be creative. You might sort of consider that. Another thing is after, you do sort of normal quote brainstorming. Alex Osborne invented the concept called brainstorming. If you read his book Applied Imagination, you'll find out that his definition of brainstorming is clearly much more structured than what we as lay people might say is brainstorming. But basically, if you sort of think about normal brainstorming, give me some ideas, etc., and then you ask yourself the question, can I do better? That's where these creativity tools come in, where you can do sort of invention on demand kind of tools and techniques to push that brainstorming more structured. And you can go from, verb noun tools to all sorts of tools, taking the opposite, et cetera, lion's den. I mean, there's countless creativity tools. Another thing is that one of the greatest things I think that you can do for creative muscle is to make sure that no matter what you're working on, that if you're going to come up with an idea, come up with 10 ideas and pick the best one. Yes, that's right, fluency. Push yourself to get 10 ideas to pick the best one. My good friend and manager, Carter Cantor at IBM, taught me this when I would produce, a report with some challenges and some things I'm thinking about. He wouldn't accept it unless I had 4, 5, 6, 10 ideas. And that really pushed me to start thinking beyond, what the sort of business as usual results would be and ideas would be. It's also vital, I think, as a tool and a process to invest in one of the ideas in that list in 10. Coming up with ideas and picking the best one is great. But if you don't take one and take it all the way through, you won't see the power of the inventive muscle. It's one thing to kind of exercise and just do it as a piecemeal kind of part of your life. It's a whole other thing to say, you know what? I'm going to bench press 200 pounds in 3 months. Give yourself something to complete. Another thing is that there's a reinforcement in this whole idea of creativity and the inventive muscle, because as you're doing it, you get motivated to do more novelty. There's actually an endorphin that's released when you kind of feel, you got a new idea. But you might be personally reinforced for the inventive muscle. But if you want to build it in your organization, a great tool is to recognize it, to take somebody out of the daily work and say, Mike was very creative today when he came up with this idea, or over the last week he's been working on this challenge, and I just want to thank him or her for for their personal creativity. Building the inventive muscle is just like having anything that if you want to motivate it, you've got to recognize it. One of the things is that in a team, you'll also recognize a great concept for the inventive muscle is certain people have different certain types of creative thinking. You might find someone more of an innovator coming up with broad ideas that are changing everything and there's too much change. And then there are incremental folks that come up with improvements. That's what Curtin found in his KAI, the Curtin Adapter Innovative Scale. And he had this whole idea of level versus style, was a concept that came up, which is it's not how creative you are, it's how you are creative. So there's different types of creativity. There are different types of learners, visual learners, physical learners, kinesthetic learners, audio learners. Each exhibit different ways to look at the world, and therefore their outputs of inventive muscle is different. So don't expect, if you're trying to build the inventive muscle in the organization, that one tool or one process, one technique is going to work. It's a combination of different things with different people. The last thing I would recommend as a tool or process, and maybe you're going to shut this podcast off and not go all the way through it. If I leave you with anything, is to just try it. Just try it. Just try it once. Commit to trying it. Commit to trying your inventive muscle in your organization. You will be surprised. It might be the first thing to take you on a journey. You can't go up the mountain unless you do one step at a time. Just try it. So enough about that philosophy and tools and process. Let's go over to topic number 4, the inventive muscle. Why it works. And talk about high level things and very practical things. Well, at the high level, it's almost impossible to find a breakthrough where the inventive muscle wasn't behind it. When you look at Nobel Prize winners, or people get patents, or fellows of companies, all these great changes come from, guess what? The inventive muscle. Of course, there's other places it comes from, good research and good investigation, discovery. But a huge part of discovery or investigation comes from this inventive muscle that's trying to be satisfied by trying to figure out something. Another high level area is if you take a look, every person has a brain, and that's a biological gift. They're neural networks. Your axons and neurons are firing off just like any kind of neural network might be built. So you're wired to do inventive muscle stuff. Another high level thing is if you take a look, the largest concern we have in our world right now is AI. AI taking over human intelligence. Human intelligence is going to have the inventive muscle. The inventive muscle is the largest concern we have on our planet, is that the inventive muscle might become automated with an AI. And that's 18, 20 months away, possibly. Another high level idea is that muscles are improved with use and discipline. So you can use the exact same metaphor with the inventive muscle. You can go from one invention to 2 to 3 to 4. I remember when I first started inventing, I had 1 or 2, and I drew myself a little thermometer on the back of my door that was an 8.5 by 11 sheet, and I would every time I got a new invention, I would write it down so that I went from 1 to 10, and then I went from 10 to 20, and pretty soon when I had the back of my door, I had like these 10 different pieces of paper, taped together to try to get to 100. I was actually trying to build the inventive muscle as a methodological approach in my own life. So if you want to exhibit, the inventive muscle, you keep using it. I mean, look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, what he did with his muscles. It's the same process. Another high level observation about the inventive muscle is that recognition, recognition, recognition is what drives it. If you want to build the inventive muscle in your organization and someone actually does something that's inventive, you can either say something or not. You can go out of your way and say something. You can give them an award. You can give them a dinner for 2. You can do anything you want to recognize that behavior. You do that, and you are starting the inventive muscle in your organization. You can go work out, okay, tonight. But if you work out tonight and you say, I'm going to stay an extra half hour, and I'm going to push this one weight, you walk out of there with that kind of internal thankfulness. Let's switch over to sort of practical level. Practical level stuff for invention is we talked about it being new and useful, which is the definition of creativity, and all people practically have that, right? Another practical level about it is when you focus this inventive muscle on a business issue, you tend to get new results, not business as usual results. Anybody will tell you that if you try to do it the way everybody else has done, that's a definition of insanity. Another practical level is that if you talk to CEOs and you listen very carefully to them, they're all talking about why they're different, why they're unique in the market, why you should use their service or product. They're always talking about how they're different, how they're better and different. That's underneath that is the inventive muscle. It's very practical. It's used all the time. What if you hired for creativity? Why wouldn't you hire for creativity? Um, if you're going to spend money hiring people, spending money hiring creative people would be good. But why not spend some money in helping them be more creative to use that inventive muscle? I mean, for instance, there's plenty of tools that reinforce creative behavior. You could have all sorts of tools that kind of, you can log on to and brainstorm a whiteboard in crowds or teams. You can record it. It can do pattern searches instantly. You can have it provoke you with, thoughtful prompts for creative output. And then finally, another practical level thing is that most of the time, very practically, this creative output leads to intellectual property, which then could lead to some protection, stop copycats, M&A, valuation, raising money, you name it. And I will tell you, a huge shift today, if you're in a service organization, almost every single service organization over the last 3 or 4 years have now found that they need to start using AI and large language models and agentic AI in moving their service to being more automated. And now it turns out that almost every software, every service company is becoming a technology patenting, technology company. So there's a very practical level to this creative muscle, inventive muscle, leading to owning assets. Well, let's sort of move on to the last two topics. And coming up, I'm going to talk about why the inventive muscle might not work for you. Now, again, I'll do that from the high level to the low level. Why creativity is misunderstood, or why culturally it's a risk. I also talk about the future of building the inventive muscle, the digital inventive muscle, where AI, AGI, where all sorts of prompts and all these kinds of things can help redefine the future of the inventive muscle and how we move from the inventive muscle to this digital inventive muscle. So stay tuned. So topic number 5, why you can't build the inventive muscle. Again, from the high level to the practical. So this is just like a debate, like these are reasons for, these are reasons against. Here are some of the things that stop people from building the inventive muscle. By the way, my role in a lot of companies is to find out these things that stop companies to build the inventive muscle and to point it out and to help CEOs take the risk, have that engineer take the risk to try building their inventive muscle. First of all, from a high level, you know, people actually don't think what I'm talking about is real. They don't think that they think that their experience and their intelligence and all that is the thing that's going to give them the greatest value. Yes, being intelligent and having experience is certainly going to help. But if you start actually using the inventive muscle more, imagine adding that experience and intelligence to it. Another thing is at the highest level, one reason why it doesn't work is people aren't trained on it. If the if the verb noun creativity tool is the first time you've ever heard of a creative thinking tool, boy, have you missed out. It's like, if it's the first time you've added two numbers together to get a new bigger number, boy, you've missed out, right? If it's the first time you've ever kind of made your own breakfast, boy, you kind of missed out. If it was the first time, blah, 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 blah. If it's the first time that you've heard a creative thinking tool from me in this podcast, boy, have you missed out. So basically, another high level reason why this sort of doesn't work is there's very few companies or people that talk about it. Even the fact that you're listening to this podcast is amazing, right? I mean, you're listening to it for a reason, uh, but a lot of people don't put any credence on it at all. And there's not a lot of places to get any output. By the way, have you ever done this with the large language model? Give me an answer and then ask it to give me a more creative answer, and then look at the answers and look at the difference and say, that's not as creative, give me more. And keep asking a large language model, make it more creative, make it more creative, make it more creative. If you do that, what you'll find is it flattens right out after the first two or three times because it's using information by concatenating tokens of phrases and words together. And in our literature, in the things that a large language model looks at, there's not a lot of creative output that it can go from. And by the way, creative means new and useful, which means it's trying to find something that's really not even written, right? Or to try to use associative thinking. So very few services or companies offer training and facilitation. And that's another very high level reason why the inventive muscle is probably not going to work in your organization. Another reason why it's not going to be helpful to you is because you might not know what it is, but it's certainly not taught in business schools, not in colleges. As a matter of fact, I mentioned kids, K through 12 is where we expect it to happen. Kids start, keep asking the question, why? And then pretty soon we go to how. And that ladder of abstraction, asking why is this and why is this versus how does this work and how does this work? So the more we start focusing on the more narrow, the less the inventive muscle is going to work. Because asking the question why sometimes, tells us a lot more about the subject than asking more detailed questions about the how. Another high level issue is, as I mentioned, this De Bono character, a great author, talked about creativity versus lateral thinking, talking about the problem with inventive muscle or creative muscle is that it has a value associated with it. If I say you're creative and somebody else isn't, versus the lateral thinking. Uh, so Alex Osborne, when he invented brainstorming, the concept, he worked with two different groups, two marketing groups in the same company. One was supposed to be, quote, the creative group, and the other the non-creative group. And what he found was that the creative group used a different process than the non-creative group. And by the way, this was defined by the CEO, not by him. So he took the creative process of the creative group and then forced the non-creative group to use the creative process. And within months, you couldn't tell the difference between the output. The inventive muscle is a process because you all have neural networks and an associative thinking capability. It's a process. It's an effort. At a practical level, another reason why this might not work is just the practical rationale of the trade-offs of the risks versus I've got to solve this problem and I know how to do it and it's going to take me 2 to 3 weeks in the R&D roadmap. If I start adding some R&D experimentation on creative thinking and inventive thinking, it may not work. I build prototypes in my laboratory all the time. I go down there some weekends and I make tremendous strides. And I could go down there for 3 weekends in a row and go backwards because I blew something up or the circuit didn't work, etc. It's a risk. Those four quadrants of sort of decision making, important versus non-important and urgent versus non-urgent. Do you know how much time people spend in the non-urgent, the non-urgent important quadrant? 5% of their time. It's not urgent, but it's incredibly important in your life. So why not spend as little time as you can on it? So the practical reason behind not using the inventive muscle in your organization is incredibly practical. Who wants to take that risk? And another thing about the practical level is you're going against the culture of the organization, right? Your inventive muscle is basically new and useful, going different against everybody else. And so the culture doesn't like to digest the inventive muscle. Because what if it worked for one and not for everybody else? What if it took more time one time? Of course, there's 1,000 reasons why you would want to flex your inventive muscle. I have about 1,000,000 reasons why I don't want to go to the gym. Look, at the practical level, there's another practical thing, and that is we're all too busy, right? Who wants to spend time learning new things? I will tell you that one of the most remarkable things right now is people are being forced, literally forced, in order to keep up, to start playing with large language models. People are becoming programmers, although programmers are no longer programming because they don't write code anymore. So at the practical level, who wants to learn some new stuff? We're so busy. Another practical reason why inventive muscle wouldn't work is it's very hard to kind of get the ROI deterministic. If I put in X dollars, what do I expect to get out? John says 10X, 100X. Where is that? If you guaranteed me that, okay. Well, I've worked with some clients and we're doing prototypes and we made major breakthroughs because they've invested in the inventive muscle. Is that always the case? Can it always be there? No, it's probability. Well, is it always the case that business as usual results work? No. So why do we want to measure inventive muscle against a standard that we'd never measure anything else to? Want to take the risk that the inventive muscle will give you that 10X, 100X improvement. And then finally, the last practical part is that you hear this all the time, and this is kind of interesting. I tried it, it didn't work. To me, I'm laughing because I hear it so much. John, we tried some of that, it didn't work. And I said, okay, well, how about this? How about you try it with me for a while? because it will work. Okay. I went to the gym once. I picked up that weight and I didn't see my muscles. But it doesn't work for me. I mean, you have to have genetics, right? You have to have the DNA of an Arnold Schwarzenegger to actually have real muscles, right? So the practical level is I tried it before and it didn't work. Well, I could spend all day long kind of laughing at myself and laughing at all of us about why we don't want to use the inventive muscle, given the fact of how much it could do for us. I get that. But let's end up in a in a different place. Let's end up in a scarier place. Let's talk about topic number six, the future of building the inventive muscle, the digital inventive muscle. Yeah. I know this is a riff off the digital twin. I thought about it. I thought this was kind of fun. Have you ever heard about the digital inventive muscle? I don't know. Maybe I should trademark it, right? I'm the IP guy. But first of all, I told you about my ChatGPT story, right? That ChatGPT is not creative. And then all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, it was. It's just the beginning. If you look at creative thinking tools, I said I had 1,500 of them. How hard would it be to program prompts for each creativity tool? And how hard would it be for each creativity tool to come up at the right time? Because every creativity tool is not used for every situation. I have a toolbox. I have lots of different tools. I use one tool for very specific things. Some tools I use over and over again, like my screwdriver. There's another thing about the future of AI and the inventive muscle, and that is that AGI is coming. What is AGI? AGI is artificial general intelligence. That's the time in the future when all of a sudden an AI can actually equal the rational intelligence of all subject matters at the same time. And they expect this to happen in 2 to 3 years or earlier. So that's coming. Well, what happens when AGI comes? It's going to be able to think on every single topical area there is and come up with very reasonable, if not expert reasons all the time. So there is this basic thing, it's called sort of cross training, cross functional. And that is that if you have a person who's an electrical engineer and the person is also really good at sewing, those two skills come together and they might come up with a better sewing machine. But you could take that same electrical engineer and apply it to maybe they have a different kind of hobby, like music. And all of a sudden you've got improvements in, audio amplifiers. What happens if you took an electrical engineer and basically say that that person really wants to study worms? I'm just making this stuff up. Well, how would an electrical engineer apply studying worms? Well, he might developing circuits to actually, measure the wiggleness of a worm or its skin resistance. I mean, you just can imagine, right? What happens when you have an artificial intelligence that has every single domain inside of it running at incredible speeds, crossing all these things against all these things? Think about the creative output. And it's 2 or 3 years away. That gives us like a view of the future of building this inventive muscle. Think about sort of these large language models for a minute, and specifically inventive muscle prompts. You can do that, right? I've had some people come to me and say, "Hey, John, I wrote up this provisional using ChatGPT. How much would it cost for you to take a look at it and to, fix it for me?" I said about twice what it would cost if I did it myself, because the ChatGPTs, and I'm not just picking on ChatGPT, large language models, they're not trained on how to do this stuff. They'll do anything you ask. As a matter of fact, not only does it do whatever you ask, it keeps asking if it could do something else for you. Have you noticed that? Oh, yeah, you're studying worms. How about I give you a study on how dirt affects the skin resistance of a worm going through the mud? Would you like me to do that? And would you like me to write a report and give it to your teacher? I mean, it keeps asking me what it wants to do for me. Another thing about sort of this whole future of where this heads is the speed to market. Agentic AI is coming to replace inventiveness. Basically, AI and now agents of AI can call other agents of AI to essentially get more work done where you don't actually do it. The agents go out and do the work for you. Well, what happens if you take AGI, this huge matrix of crossing of all intelligence, and embed it in all these agents that can go off and do the work? You can make the argument that AGI doesn't need human beings, and that's the argument that's being made. A while back, IBM wrote an article called The Frontier Company. This changed my mind on how I ran my own organization. And my staff could tell you the day that I read this article, I pulled everybody together and commanded that we would get into the AI business in a very strong way and right away. I opened up resources, I changed everybody's schedule, and I said, thou shalt. Because IBM described this frontier company as taking your organization of 40, 50, 100 people and assuming those people are circles in the organization and taking one of those circles and coloring it black as soon as that organizational behavior was done in an AI and call that an agent. And pretty soon people will be managing agents of agents. And I sort of recognized, wow, that's true, right? That our organizations are going to turn into AI, large language model, set of prompts, etc. And that's happening today. I don't know how many companies I deal with on a routine basis where they not only embrace it and doing it, they're fearing for it, they're not sure they can do it. And that's the world we're living in. Apply the inventive muscle to that organization as one of those black dots and marry it to each one of the organizational opportunities. One of the things is it's not just software now. Robots are going to touch the digital world. And here comes my digital inventive muscle. Look, there is a reason why some companies are pushing towards getting robots to touch the world. I have this great story I've told a number of my CEO friends and clients. So I'm in my laboratory, I'm an electrical engineer. I'm building a breadboard circuit, resistors, capacitors, transformers, you name it, inductors. And I'm building it on a breadboard, which means I'm trying to test it out. It has maybe 40, 50 components on it with wires all over the place, power supplies, oscilloscopes, and it's not working. I spent hours doing it. And I'm retracing the circuit and I'm trying to figure out how to make this thing work. So I did something. I can't believe I thought of this because no one's ever told me to do this. I just thought I could do it. I took a picture of that breadboard and I put it into a large language model and said, I'm trying to build this circuit. Here's a picture of the circuit diagram. Here's a picture of my breadboard. Can you help? It came back and told me a blue wire connected to this row and this column was in the wrong place and it should be moved. And this component was in the reverse way. It was a transistor wasn't in the right way from the picture. I'm like, nah, no. I made the change and the circuit worked. I was like, what? Well, that's crazy, right? But once I learned that, then I said, I wondered what else, because I had to build an improvement circuit to attach to this circuit based upon what I was finding. So it said, I said, I have all these components. They're in these boxes. You buy them in kits from Amazon. Here are all my 25 different capacitors, my 50 different types of resistors, my inductors, etc. So I decided to take a picture of the capacitor box and the resistor box and the inductor box, etc. And I took those pictures and put it into the LLM. And I said, these are the components that I have in my lab. This is the circuit I want to build. Pick out the best ones. And if you're going to have a resistor of 100 ohms and we have a 100 ohm resistor, that's great. But maybe you don't have 100 ohms and you have to put two or three things in parallel to get the 100 ohms or in series. It literally told me which components to take and how to put it together in the circuit, and it worked. It would have taken me hours and hours and hours to figure that out. And then I said, it couldn't do this, could it? I basically said, this is an input signal and this is the output signal. I put it on my oscilloscope. And I took a movie of my oscilloscope. And I said, this is what's happening. AI, could you tell me what is going on at this point of the circuit to cause that? Not only did it tell me, but it told me what experiments to run to inject a new signal to get the change I wanted. And it was right. That's crazy, right? And then I recognized that I could take Grok and all the rest, and I can talk to it in my laboratory, right? I'm not taking pictures, just that. I'm talking about it. I'm saying I'm doing this, and now I'm doing this, and it's talking back to me. I was literally Tony Stark and Iron Man in my laboratory. And that was 6 months ago. The inventive muscle has gone digital, and these robots are going to touch the digital world. I thought, oh my goodness, if this LLM starts asking me to run experiments on my breadboard so it can get the output, so it can use it, and I did it because I'm a human being, and it's learning about my circuit because it's telling me what to change. I put it in the circuit, it's looking at the output, it's telling what to change, doing it over and over again. That's pretty crazy, right? Well, what happens if you have a robot to do that? Now the robot's touching the physical world. And Sam Altman would tell you that you need reality to test these AIs because the real world is how it works. In a theoretical world, it might not work. So now we have the digital ability of the inventive twin. And when you basically convince a robot that it can sweep your kitchen floor. The instant it's sweeping your kitchen floor and it does a good job, of course, you could say, good job, robot, right? I'm thinking about the name of my robot. I actually am building a robot right now for another set of experiments. But imagine that when the robot figures out how to sweep my kitchen, that becomes an app that goes in the cloud that every single robot in the world would know that app. So once my first robot is taught, every single robot gets taught instantly. Now think about a robot in the laboratory making physical changes. What happens when this AGI gets off the machine and into the hands of robots? That's a future where the inventive muscle becomes a digital inventive muscle. And what does that mean to your organization? I could tell you what it meant to my prototype. I made major advancements to my prototype. I was looking like a genius to my clients. Okay. Although I thought that the story that I'm telling was more beneficial than what I was doing for my clients, to tell you the truth. I can also tell you that no domain will be untouched by this digital muscle. I can tell you that what becomes the definition of invention? New, useful, non-obvious. Well, what if the patent office says it has to be new, it has to be useful, it has to be non-obvious, but this new inventions that we're going to get, call them super patents, have to be instantly impactful to reality. New, useful, non-obvious, and instantly impactable to reality. That's the future of the patent system, in my personal opinion. Now, the last part I'll talk about, this last thing, is kind of intriguing me, probably because of where I am in life. They're now talking about the thing called longevity escape velocity. If you haven't looked that up, you should look it up. Longevity escape velocity means, today is 2026, January. It says that if you can live to say 2030, 2030, 4 years from now, if you can live to 2030, in that year, you will live and get a month of your life back because of technology, because of new drugs, drug discovery, because of nanotechnology, because of all the things, the improvement of food, you name it. In the United States this week, they just announced the longest longevity in the United States ever, 79 years old on average. Longevity escape velocity says if you can live long enough, you can escape age. Because if you could do this for 5 years, 8 years, 9 years, you start regressing in age. Look it up. Longevity escape velocity. Ray Kurzweil, I think, and friends have sort of defined what happens with the singularity, and LEV is what happens. It's a penultimate inventive muscle. The inventive muscle goes digital and then comes back to help us live longer and live better. Superabundance, super patent office, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Okay, so let's wrap up. I talked about my journey in the first topic, my journey from IBM, top inventor, the vacuum cleaner thing, the AHA stuff, IP capitalist methodology, training the inventive muscle, thousands of clients, 15% of the Fortune 100, watching the augmentation now with AI tools, and I've learned a whole bunch in my journey. And I can tell you my personal journey should be kind of a template to let you know that someone has done some of this stuff, and I can be a mentor and tell you some of these things that you can do in your life and in your organization. In topic number 2, we talked about the value of creative thinking. The first 4 or 5 podcasts in my series here, I think do a great job of bringing you up from nothing to creative thinking. But we talked about how if it's a learned, purposeful thing, it moves from your brain into practical reality. It's fun, it's contagious. We gave you some examples of that. It's measurable, it moves to get patents. It's great because if you can motivate it intrinsically, the ability to make it work further and further. So the value of creative thinking is great for organizations, even better for personal exploration. We then move to topic number 3 about tools and process and motivation. Talking about effective invention happens when you use these tools in some level of routineness. You generate ideas and you iterate on them, continuous improvement thinking. And then you kind of tackle the hardest things and give yourself a list of 10 and at least do one and try it. So tools, motivation, and process. And from that, then I jumped on why it works in an organization from high level to practical level. I talked about it sits behind every single major breakthrough. It sits behind all these things. And your brain is a neural network anyway, so you're wired to do this inventive muscle. It drives our future. And when used deliberately and with recognition as a practical level, you can turn it on and basically go way past this non-business, this business as usual behavior. And then you can frequently use it and then start converting that inventive muscle output very practically to all sorts of good uses, 10x, 100x improvement, doing it faster, doing it more fun, even generating intellectual property at the end of the day, creating an asset that you can own based upon that inventive muscle. What can be better than that? Topic number 5, I talked about why you can't build the inventive muscle. From the high level to the practical level. Things like it really doesn't work. I don't understand it. I can't get taught on it. Culturally, no way would I ever risk that. I got too many pressures for business as usual. Time trade-off is ridiculous. Without the proper tools and techniques, I don't know how to do this. It doesn't work. You know. And by the way, I've worked out once. I don't have the muscles that I want. And then finally ended up with this future. I hope in describing this future, but by the way, I hope that you get it, that it's happening, that artificial general intelligence is happening more and more every day. And we're going to cross a boundary where people are going to say, it's a subjective kind of line that we're there. Now a computer can take every single human creative opportunity and overlay it with itself to come up with even more inventive output and do it instantly. And then we're going to touch the robots in the physical world to get this digital inventive muscle. It's coming. So we're in the greatest of times to be able to sort of think about this, to be able to use it in our business and use it to do tremendous things. I would just ask, don't get left behind. Try it. Just try it. So this is John Cronin from Invent Anything. I hope you've liked, if you've liked what you heard, please subscribe and, come to our Inventors at Work channel as we start talking to inventors.